Alrighty, let's get rolling. So again, hello everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for hopping on this morning and joining me to discuss palms. So in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about East Coast palm issues. We had a few other webinars this year or upcoming webinars discussing other palm issues. So if you're interested or want more information, I encourage you to sign up for those as well. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. You'll notice that the chat box is disabled. So for this webinar, we are only going to be using the Q&A box. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please drop them in there. The webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you in about 2 business days after today's webinar. This webinar is worth 1 ISA CEU. And after the webinar, we will submit your name and certification number to ISA on your behalf. So there's no action required on your part. When you signed up, you should have entered your ISA certification number. If you did not, please make sure that you drop it in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we'll make sure that that's recorded so that you get credit for this work. So my name is Kendra Wagner. I'm a research scientist at Rainbow Ecoscience. I'm over in the research and development department. Some of you are familiar faces. I can see your names. Unfortunately, I can't see your faces, but essentially I work on research trials throughout the nation, everything from palms, drought, landscape stress, as well as bop around to different meetings. So you might have seen me at other summits or meetings. So again, today we're going to be talking about East Coast palm issues, specifically insects, nutrient, and disease issues. And we're going to be focusing on East Coast stuff, but there are a few things in here that aren't yet present to the East Coast that I want to bring to your attention and just make you aware of going forward. So we have a number of learning objectives for today's talk. If I do my job correctly, or if I do my job well, you'll be able to understand the importance of palms in managed landscapes. I assume you already know that they're important because you are here today, but I want to explore their value a little bit further. We're going to identify key palm physiology and key palm characteristics, and we're going to use those to describe some of the insects and diseases that we're exploring today. Hopefully, you'll be able to identify symptoms of palm nutrient deficiencies, as well as common pests and diseases, and determine the best management options for each of these. Starting out, I wanted to take a step back and just get a better idea of the importance of palms and the presence of palms in North American landscapes. So globally, there are about 2,800 species of palm trees, and they're predominantly found in tropical or subtropical regions. This is something that we know. Palm trees have existed for over 60 million years and are actually an integral part of human cultures. Palm trees have been iconic in managing palm trees have been iconic in our landscapes, and unfortunately, many of them are actually aging out or facing threats from pests and diseases. When we think of palms, we frequently think of a beautiful beach, or at least I do, a tropical area, but palms are actually really, really important in managed landscapes nowadays. Palms are commonly utilized as accent plants, avenue trees, elements in raised beds, understory and filler plants, and even along natural edges or fences. And we can see, the classic in and out palms on the West Coast. They're just, one of the signatures of that restaurant. And we also see areas like avenues and managed landscapes have these beautiful areas of palms that are really just the highlight to some of these managed landscapes. Now, this is a really interesting map. This is the density gradient of native palm species per 10,000 kilometers squared. And essentially what that means is that in these green areas, you have a higher density of native palm species. So more native palm species are present. Whereas in the red areas, you have fewer native palm species, and in the white, almost none. Now, even though this is looking at specifically native palm species, it's important to highlight that palms will grow outside of this region, although they will frequently face very distinct and very severe cold tolerance issues, as well as nutrient issues when they're found outside of these regions. Now, many of these species, many of these 2,800 species that I mentioned before, will grow in areas like South Florida, as we can see here in this dark blue region, although fewer species, again, are able to thrive in managed environments, even within this range. Before we start talking about nutrient deficiencies and pathogens and insects, it's important that we discuss physiology and different traits or identification traits for palm trees. Now, this is a photo of your stereotypical palm tree. And again, this is overly generalized. There are very different forms as well as multi-stemmed forms of palm trees. And what you'll see is that we have leaf scars near the bottom. Sorry about that, my slide keeps advancing. The root initiation zone, you have your trunk as well as your young fluorescence, old leaves near the bottom, your crown, and then that spear leaf coming off the top. Now, palms will typically fit in three different categories when it comes to the shape or characteristics of their fronds. So you'll have your petiole just at the base, and that's the same in all three of these. And these three categories are typically palmate leaves, pinnate leaves, and costopalmate leaves. So we frequently see palmate leaves and pinnate leaves here in North America. And in all three of these, you'll have that petiole, and then you'll have either a blade in the palmate leaf, as we can see here on the left, and then each one of those points is what we call a segment. In a pinnate leaf, you have that, again, petiole at the bottom, which is based by the leaf base or the sheath that meets up against the palm. You'll then have your rachis, which extends up through the length of the leaf, your blades, and then the terminal leaflets. And then finally, in costopalmate leaves, you'll have that petiole at the bottom, your blades, your segment, and then what we call a costa down the middle. We can't talk about palms unless we talk about palm nutrient deficiencies. This is something that we get questions on every single day, more frequently even, I would say, than things like pathogens or insects. Now, palm nutrient deficiencies is something that is very commonly faced in North America, and it is largely dependent on where you are in North America. Folks in Florida are going to face different nutrient deficiencies than folks in maybe South Carolina or even Louisiana or Texas. So it's important that we're able to understand and identify these palm nutrient deficiencies based on the signs or symptoms. So palms use both macro and micronutrients to grow, okay? And these macro and micronutrients support various functions within the palm. This can support things like frond formation, which we just talked about, wall formation, as well as just general growth, health, and wellness. And all of these are important to just strengthening that palm and being able to resist things like insect and disease. So we're going to step through the major micro and macronutrients that palms require, and we're going to talk about what they look like and hopefully be able to go out and determine what's happening in the landscape. The first one that we're going to talk about is nitrogen. Now, nitrogen will often appear first on the oldest leaves as this sort of uniform light green color, okay, almost yellow. The entire palm, except for the spear leaf, will become chlorotic. So you'll have these yellowing, not brown, not bronze, but very yellow colors at these older leaves. And then that spear leaf that we talked about earlier will still appear green. Typically, when we have shortage of nitrogen, we see overall growth rate will be reduced as well as these obvious aesthetic issues. The next important one is potassium. Now, potassium is interesting. We call it frizzle top. As you can see here in this photo, when you look at a palm from far away and it's experiencing potassium issues, you will see this sort of frizzly look. Now, if you look up close, what you'll see is yellow spots. They're almost translucent. And this occurs almost around all of those stomates throughout the leaf. We'll also see that older leaves as well as, older leaves in the canopy will be, you'll see this sort of tip necrosis on it. So as you can see in that photo in the front there, this frizzling as well as this sort of like browning or dying off. And in severe cases in potassium deficiency, you will experience severe trunk tapering or almost penciling. The next one we'll discuss is magnesium. Now, magnesium is pretty easy to identify once you have a good eye for it. Magnesium actually easily and quickly leaches from the soil, especially in Florida landscapes. You'll find that the older fronds, or the ones closest to the ground, will begin to yellow, and that those new growth or that spear leaf will continue to be green. It's rarely fatal, although it should be managed. It's aesthetically displeasing, as well as it can just generally reduce the overall health of your plant. Now, the way I identify this one is magnesium versus manganese. Magnesium has MAG, G is in ground, so the fronds closest to the ground will be yellow, whereas the fronds closest to the top will be green. And that's because the palm is just taking those nutrients and all of that magnesium and pushing it up to those new growth. The next one, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about is manganese. Manganese is very interesting. What you'll typically see is that the newer fronds are chlorotic versus magnesium, where those older fronds or ones closest to the ground are chlorotic. Generally, we see this impact or the effect on that spear leaf, so that new leaf coming out of the top. And if it's bad enough, we can actually see death of that meristem. So that spear leaf and that meristem can actually die off, and it will actually halt growth and eventually lead to plant death. So again, magnesium versus manganese. Magnesium, you see the ground leaves or ones closest to the ground are more commonly chlorotic. Manganese, the ones on the top or the new growth are typically chlorotic. The next one that we'll discuss is iron. Now, iron is something that's important to all landscape plants. And what we typically see with palms is actually not a lack of iron in the soil, but typically the roots inability to take up that iron. So we'll see lack of root respiration, lack of root aeration, or maybe the palm being planted too deep. So if you go out and you think that you have an iron deficiency, it is possible that you test your soil and you have plenty of iron in your soil. Look for root issues. If that is the case, it may be an issue with the roots just being unable to take up that iron that's available in the soil. Typically, what we see with an iron deficiency in palms is this interveinal necrosis, or this necrosis between the veins of the leaves. And in severe cases, we'll see the entire canopy goes necrotic all at once. And again, with this one as well, death of the meristem is possible if it's a chronic issue and occurs and goes untreated. Next important one is boron. Now, boron is also very, very easy to identify in the landscape. Boron is also easily leached from ground, and we see a lack of boron. It's more common in desert areas versus tropical or neotropical areas. The problem with boron is it actually tightly binds to organic matter. So if you have a soil that is really high in organic matter, that boron can tightly bind to it and not be available for the plant to take it up. You'll see a wide range of symptoms, especially on new leaves, but one thing that you can always look out for is this hooking look. So in the top photo on the top right, you see this very stereotypical kind of zigzag pattern or hook occurring in the leaves, and that is very indicative of a boron deficiency. In the photo in the front or on the bottom left, you'll also see in this fan two occurrences where boron was deficient during growth. So you'll actually see these bands, and those are indicative of essentially events or times during that growth that boron was deficient for one reason or another. So being able to identify these nutrient deficiencies is really common, but also, or really important, sorry, but it's also important to understand how to treat them. Soil testing is something that you always want to do, but again, in some things like iron, even if you have an abundance of something in the soil, there could be other issues leading to this deficiency. So make sure that you're reaching out to folks like myself or your local territory managers to help you identify what's actually happening with some of these deficiencies. Next, we're going to hop into common diseases in palms. Now, I unfortunately did not have enough time in this 1 hour session. I could have done a whole talk on diseases, a whole talk on insects. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go over high-level stuff, okay? We're going to go over high-level diseases and high-level insects, the ones that are heavy hitters that you really want to be watching for in the landscape. If there are more diseases or more insects that you want us to go into or go in depth about, you will receive a survey link after this webinar, and just make sure that you tell us, what you're looking for, or what we may have missed. So the first one that we're going to discuss is pink rot, okay? And as the name suggests, it shows up as this bright pink staining in the xylem or within the tree. It's typically caused by a fungus, and it's really common in queen palm as well as fan palm. Now, this one can spread by equipment. So if you're doing hurricane pruning or any kind of pruning or maintenance, you want to make sure that you're sanitizing your tools between one site to another. The next one that's really important that you might see in the landscape is called Pestalozzi leaf blight. Now, this is also caused by a fungus, and it's associated with a wide range of palm species. So you can see it on several different palm species. Now, this is more common in moist or subtropical regions, but it can also be spread by water droplets. So you want to make sure that you're irrigating correctly and that you don't have infected areas with irrigation that it could spread to other areas. You also want to make sure that you are removing any infected tissue and properly disposing of that so it doesn't, again, easily spread to neighboring plants. Now, this can typically start as small gray or black lesions on the leaf tissue, and fungicides can prevent further spread, but more importantly, it can protect tissue that has not been infected. Now, the next one is something that we hopefully have all heard of, or at least are aware of to some extent. Lethal bronzing and lethal yellowing is something that is running rampant through many regions of the country. Now, lethal bronzing and lethal yellowing, to my understanding, was first discovered in Texas, but there's a lot of research regarding how it's spread and how we can better protect our palms from lethal bronzing or lethal yellowing. Now, lethal bronzing or lethal yellowing will usually present itself as early fruit drop. Now, these are the early symptoms of this disease. You'll also see flower blackening or discoloration. And so if you're experiencing that, make sure that you're reaching out to properly diagnose this issue. You'll also see a discoloration beginning with the older leaves progressing upwards. And like the name suggests, this foliage will turn a bronze color. So it's not going to be yellow like some of the necrotic tissue that we studied earlier. This will be a bronzing color and it will dry out in that bronze color. You can see that in the bottom right. So you can see just general necrotic tissue on the left and then that lethal bronzing tissue on the right. So it gives it that bronze hue. Progression of this is actually very, very quick. So once your palm is infected, and once you know it's infected, it can actually die within 2 to 3 months. So very, very quick. Again, if you think that you have signs or symptoms of things like early leaf drop, as well as flower blackening or discoloration, you want to make sure that you're getting this diagnosed. Now, we can't talk about lethal bronzing or yellowing without talking about the vector of this. Now, this is vectored differently than some of the diseases that we talked about already. This is vectored by a plant hopper. This photo in the front is an example of that plant hopper. Now, it's vectored by the American palm psyllid, and Hapaxilus crudis is the scientific name. Now, when we're discussing the vector of this disease, we always want to talk about vector control. There are a number of different ways that you can control the vector. It spends most of its lifetime in the turf surrounding palms. And so applications of products like imidacloprid in the turf surrounding palms can help reduce overall populations of the palm psyllid. And then there's also the option of trunk injections of OTC or oxytetracycline into the palm in order to reduce the risk of the palm actually getting that disease. And then the final pathogen that we'll discuss today is Ganoderma. Ganoderma is something that is prevalent in a lot of areas of the world where palms grow. Ganoderma is a fungi. Actually, as you can see, it causes these huge bracket fungi or these huge bracket mushrooms at the base of the plant. It's really common on cabbage palm, date palm, fan palm, as well as coconut palms. And again, you'll see this decay on the lower stem, and it's lethal. This is unfortunately not treatable. We have not determined a way to treat this once it starts. So once you see that bracket fungi, it's important to just remove the palm. And that's because we want to reduce overall risk of that palm falling or failing and hurting somebody. You'll also see wilting of the foliage and reduced growth, as well as necrosis of the foliage. Once you start to see the issue in the foliage, it's already too late. So if you don't have a bracket fungi, or maybe if the homeowner or somebody went by and removed that bracket fungi because it was unsightly, but you are seeing these issues in the canopy, it's already too late. You have to remove that palm. Now, this type of fungi actually survives in the soil. So if you remove that palm and you replant a palm in the same spot, it's highly likely that that second palm will also be infected with Ganoderma. So site sterilization is required for this disease. You want to make sure that you're removing all of the infected tissue and actually sterilizing the site and the soil before even considering replanting in that site. Next, we're going to talk about common insects found in palms. Now, again, some of these are not yet present in the Southeast, but they are important for us to highlight them regardless. So the first one we'll cover is the palmetto weevil. Now, the palmetto weevil, as we can see with this list, has a wide range of hosts, okay? It's present everywhere from Texas over to South Carolina and then down into South Florida. And it really has this beautiful coloring and this beautiful detail on its back. So it is a weevil, so it has this very long, almost snout-looking nose on the front. The larvae are a little difficult to identify or decipher between the palm weevil as well as other weevil larvae, but they're essentially small grubs that you'll find within the plant or within the tree. They overwinter and pupate within the tree, and then they emerge as adults to mate and then lay their eggs again. Now, the palmetto weevil has this beautiful, almost bronze red color that can change a little bit, but you'll always have the dotted pattern. And again, that almost snout-like, that's very telltale of the weevil. Now, this is an example of their life cycle. So starting with the eggs hatch about 3 to 4 days after being laid. The larvae feed on that soft tissue around the apical meristem for about 2 to 3 months. So again, they're feeding right up in the crown. They're very difficult to identify unless you see them up close. They pupate for about 1 week. So that's where they go from that larvae stage to the adult stage. And then the adults emerge and begin feeding. Now, there are a number of different ways that we can treat this pest. We can do Zytect injections throughout the growing season. We want to retreat every 6 to 12 months. Transtect, as well as Transtect injections or Transtect infusible, as well as Zytect soil applications. Now, this is going to depend on where you are and what type of palm you have. And so make sure that you're reaching out to identify the best application rate for these applications. The next one that we're going to talk about is the giant palm borer. This is not yet present in areas like Louisiana eastward. We do, however, have it in Texas, and we do source a lot of our palms from Texas here in the Southeast, so it's easily transported through nursery-grown stock. Now, the giant palm borer, again, the larvae or the grub stage, which is what you can see in that left photo there, it's difficult to distinguish that between other grub stages. So it's important that you're collecting those grubs if you find them, and that you're sending them off to local outreach or extension agencies in order to be able to identify exactly what's happening. Very rarely will you approach a tree and you'll have the adult stage present. The adult stages are pretty easy to identify, so if you see a grub like this, make sure that you're gathering it, putting it in a vial or a container with ethanol or alcohol, and then sending it off to your local extension labs. Now, the giant palm borer will attack things like California fan palm as well as date palm. And again, it is common in Texas and California, and it's just one of those ones we want to keep an eye out for here in the rest of the states in the Southeast. Now, when you walk up to a palm, because this insect is so big and because it's emerging from the palm after it's actually pupated, you'll see these very large exit holes, almost like shotgun holes on the side of the tree. And they're very telltale. You might need binoculars to identify them or at least take a photo of them. But if you see something like this, you're likely dealing with a borer of some sort. The next one is the royal palm bug. Now, this is found in Florida. It really likes Cuban royal palm. The royal palm females actually deposit their eggs along the midribs of the emerging leaflets. So those brand new leaflets that are coming out, as you can see in that top photo there, they'll lay their eggs right along there, and they're little white, they almost look like small pieces of rice, cream-colored eggs right along that midrib. Now, females usually only lay 1 egg per day, and they have about a 1-month life cycle. And there are a number of different ways we can treat this pest. Again, Zytect trunk injection, Trans-Tect soil applications, Trans-Tect infusible trunk injections, as well as Zytect soil applications. And we want to make sure, again, that we're getting this dosage right, depending on the type of palm that you're dealing with and how big it is. The next pest that we'll talk about is a scale pest. So we're switching from borers to scales. Phantasma scale is something that is really emerging, especially in South Florida, and it is spreading. Now, there's currently work being done to optimize the treatment of this scale. It has many hosts. You can find it on many different species. In these photos here, you can even find it on the fruit of the palm in high infestations. It was originally detected in Miami-Dade County in 2018. Now, the crawlers of this pest can actually spread on the wind and can also spread via birds and mammals. So they're easily spread around to your landscape. So if you're not treating it, it can spread to neighboring plants quite easily. Now, this pest actually has about a 1.5 to 2 month life cycle. Again, that depends on where you are and how warm it is. But it's important to stress that it is a very quick life cycle and you can have overlapping generations, which is typically what causes these very, very highly infested areas. And you'll really often find this pest in its early infestation time within the leaf folds of the palm. Now, again, there are a number of different ways to treat this. We are committed to learning more about this pest and developing out this protocol further. You can treat this pest using something like Proxite plus a horticultural oil as sort of a limb or contact spray. You can also do soil applications of Trans-Tect or lower systemic bark sprays. Systemic bark sprays are something that I wish we would utilize more. They're so easy to apply. And so it's something that is a great option for a pest like this. And also we have the option of Trans-Tect infusible via tree injection when necessary with palms. Palm leaf skeletonizer is another pest that we're seeing more and more in Florida landscapes. This is one that's actually native to Florida, which is interesting. And it has many different hosts, up to 79 different palm species. We see this more frequently or more prominently on palmate leaves versus pinnate leaves, which is quite interesting. And the larvae can actually be present throughout the year. As we can see here, the larvae almost look like a wireworm or a very small caterpillar, and they create almost these mats of silk that catch up all of their frass and byproduct, and that's what we see on the photo on the right. We see almost like channels where these insects have been feeding, where they catch up all of that byproduct in their silk, and it causes these almost mats of, it looks like mud or dirt on the plant. What'll happen is if you actually remove that mat or in high infested areas, you'll be able to see that skeletonizer damage where they essentially remove one layer of the leaf and thereby impact its ability to get food and everything else that it needs from the sun. You can actually see that skeletonizing damage at the top where part of that mat just stops short right where the damage is. I don't know if I can use my my pointer on this, but you can see it right here. The next insect that we'll discuss is the palm aphid. Now, this is actually a scale lookalike, okay? So this one is a little tricky to identify. It has in its adult or later instar stages, it has a very similar form or shape to a scale, but this white fringe on the outside is common to some aphids. You can see in the younger stages, they look very stereotypical like an aphid. Now, this photo on the right is a great example of a mutualistic ant-aphid relationship. So as the aphids use their piercing sucking mouth parts to go into the plant and draw up all those plant juices, they excrete honeydew, and the ants are able to come and actually mine that. The ants in return offer protection to some of these aphid populations. So you'll commonly see in high infested aphid populations, you'll also see high populations of ants as well because of that mutualistic relationship. Now, because of that honeydew excretion, you'll oftentimes see this very telltale black sooty mold that you see here on this other photo. Now, that black sooty mold is just taking that opportunity to grow on that honeydew that's being secreted. And so you'll see that on things like sidewalks, patio furniture under these trees. And it's one of the first indications that you have some kind of a foliar feeding insect or piercing sucking insect. Now, the palm aphid is common on Malaysian dwarf varieties of coconut palms, as well as date palms, Chinese fan palm, Alexander palm, and Washington palm. And again, they are scale look-alike, and you'll commonly find them in early stages on unopened fronds. So if you think that you have an issue with the palm aphid, if you go up to those unopened fronds, the fronds that are still tightly packed, just pry them open a little bit and you'll be able to see that palm aphid right in there. The next one that we'll talk about is the cycad scale. Now, the cycad scale will cause almost like this white hue over the entire leaf. And as the name suggests, it is a scale insect. You can see that in the photo just there on the left, where you see the adult and the crawler life stages present. Now, they have a number of different cycad scales that are present, although this scale seems to favor sago palms within the landscape. Initially, it will infest things like trunk as well as the base of leaves, and the crawlers will actually emerge and infest things like leaves, cones, seeds, and even roots. So again, the initial infestation, you'll commonly find it on the trunk or the base of the leaves, and then as the infestation grows or gets greater, it will spread out to the entire tree. And look, as I said, for this white sort of cast on the leaf. The scales are very, very small unless you're looking up close, but you will always see this white sort of byproduct that they produce. And that is essentially old exoskeletons or old scales that have died off that just kind of stick right there to the leaf. You'll often see things like yellow or bleached looking spots, and that's because they're using their piercing sucking mouth part to go into those leaves and leaflets and actually suck out all of those juices. A number of different ways we can treat this, but again, we're committed to actually building out these protocols. You can use something like peroxide or horticultural oil, and this is a great contact spray, leaf or limb spray. You can also do something like a Transect application, which can be done as either a soil application or that lower systemic bark spray, which is a great option to explore with a pest like this. And then finally, we cannot talk about palm insects without talking about spiraling whitefly. As the name suggests, you will see this sort of spiral on the underside of the leaves where the adult female will lay her eggs. This is sort of like a waxy material if you touch it. Usually you'll also see sooty mold associated with this pest. Again, the females will lay their eggs on the undersides of the leaves, and they have 5 developmental stages. The crawlers will molt into this immature stage that are mobile. They're either able to move out throughout the plant and feed. And there are a number of different ways that we can treat this. We can do something like peroxide and a horticultural oil as a foliar or limb spray. There's options like Transect as soil, lower bark spray, or tree injection when it's appropriate. Zytect is also a great option for tree injection. And then finally, Zytect 2F as a soil application. So in summary, nutrient deficiencies are common in managed landscapes. Symptoms can vary based on the deficiency. Sanitation is vital to control pathogens. That's both sanitation of the site, removing impacted or infected material, as well as sanitizing your materials or your equipment that you use to prune or manage these plants. Weevils can be fatal and require careful monitoring and treatment when needed. And scale pests are very prevalent in the Southeast. We see them all over the place, and we have a couple of different options to treat them as well. This is my contact information. If there's anything that you have further questions on or you would like me to cover in my next talk, please don't hesitate to reach out. Either text, call, or email is appropriate. And with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions that are in the Q&A chat box. We've got a couple of people putting in their ISA number. I appreciate that. I'll go ahead and remove those. Again, if you haven't put your ESA number, or if you didn't put your ESA number when you registered or you're not sure, go ahead and pop it into the Q&A, and we'll make sure that that gets recorded. Okay, we have one question. Treatment for palm aphids, same as cycad scale. They are similar. Now, it depends on the site or the symptom that you're seeing, and it definitely depends on your site characteristics to determine what treatment you want to use. So if you have any questions that are site specific, go ahead and reach out to me with this email and we can discuss it further. We have another question, suggestions for sterilizing a site after Ganoderma has been removed. That's a great question. Now, I've heard some wild claims with this one. I don't know that there is currently an industry standard for this. Sterilizing the site can be very difficult because you are trying to sterilize soil. I have heard everything, and I don't suggest this, but applying pretty volatile product to the area and treating it with fire. I've heard other fungicides might work. I can look into that a little bit further, Craig. Again, I'm not sure that there is an industry standard for that. If anybody on the call knows, please feel free to pop that in, but I'll get back to you with that, Craig. Does Ganoderma affect trees as well as palm? Is it safe to plant a tree versus palm in the same location after palm removal? That's a good question, Todd. So there are Ganoderma species that affect broadleaf trees. What I would always recommend is that you remove that plant material and sanitize that site appropriately before even considering replanting another tree, whether it be broadleaf or palm. Have you seen Skeletonizer kill a palm, or is it mostly an annoyance? That's a good question. So the Skeletonizer in very high chronic populations, so very high populations that have gone untreated for a long time or several years, can significantly reduce just the overall capability of that palm to produce chlorophyll or to get sugars or resources from the sun. So what can happen along with a lot of these other foliar things or foliar pests is we can see in early stages minimal impact, mostly just unsightly since it is a foliar pest. But if it goes untreated for several years, it can kill the pest or can kill the tree, sorry. Todd asks, is bamboo susceptible to Ganoderma? I'm actually not sure, Todd. I'm not very knowledgeable on bamboo. But again, I can look into that for you and get back to you on that because that's a really good question. Okay, just looking through, it looks like we have a lot of ISA numbers being popped in. Okay, if there are any final questions, please go ahead and pop them in the Q&A. We have a little bit of time. I finished early today. Other than that, please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions, and happy to discuss this a little further with you guys if needed. So if there's nothing else, I appreciate all of you for joining today, and I hope you learned something, but please take a look at our future webinars because there's all kinds of stuff coming up this year, and we've got a really great webinar series. So I appreciate all of you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.